Hello, welcome to Stories in Time. My name is Ellousie Schoettler and I'm a storyteller. Lately I've been thinking about my life in the other days, the younger days, and little stories have popped up and I'm going to share one with you in this story. In 1957, we were just married a couple of years and we had a 9-month-old baby with us when we moved to Brooklyn, New York, where Jim was going to be an intern at the Kings County Hospital. He just graduated from Johns Hopkins Medical School. I was overwhelmed by the size of New York, by the size of Brooklyn. Things were just so different from where I came from. I'd been living in Baltimore, but I was from Charlotte, North Carolina, which was small. The thing that was the most like someplace where I had lived in Charlotte was the street we were going to be living on as we rented an apartment, because there were trees all along the sides of the sidewalk that made it feel very friendly and very familiar. There were problems in the house, but I was so glad to have found a place that would accept a child that I didn't think through what were going to be the difficulties. Well, the first difficulty that I didn't think about was the fact that our apartment was on the 3rd floor. It was a 3-story house. And that you walked up 3 flights, and when you got to the top, there was no doorway. There were steps that went in, there were, was a railing around, but there was no door to close off our apartment. There was no door to close to protect and hold back our little boy either, but that came up a little later. So you have to look carefully at where you are and what the problems are going to be on your side and the other side. I liked that house, particularly I liked it. Mrs. Geiger was a very nice woman to be renting from. She was very interesting because there were paintings all over all of the rooms on our floor, and I saw them everywhere we went. She was a painter. And I enjoyed living with her work. Before I had started being a painter, so I didn't know the right questions, but I certainly enjoyed what she had there. We arrived at the last week of June, 1957. Jim got started to work. I was unpacking, getting things arranged, chasing Jimmy around, trying to keep him off the steps. And then I decided that every afternoon I would take him outside for a walk. I would carry his tailor tot, one of those metal tailor tots, down to the street and then push him for the walk that we wanted to do, or that I wanted to do. He loved it. You know, there's a tray in the bottom of a tailor tot where the child can stand up. And once they stand up and they're holding on to the bars in the front, they can wave, they can call out, they can be almost a little bit free, except they can't get out of that push cart. And we'd walk around. I didn't see anybody that looked to be like my age. And I didn't see any that were his age, any children particularly. But it was so interesting. Every afternoon, there was a big apartment house across the street. It was red brick. I don't know how many floors it had, but it's a red brick apartment building. And after lunchtime, a group of elderly women would come downstairs out of their apartments. They would be carrying a folded wooden stool, with a canvas seat on it. And they were, on their arms were large fabric bags that seemed to be filled with things. And they sat in groups along the sidewalks. They did this every day. They were very close. They were very chatty. And they laughed, and they talked, and they talked, and they talked. and I didn't understand one word that they were saying because they were speaking in another language. Well, it turned out that when I said something to them, hello, or it's a nice day, they thought that I was speaking in another language because my Southern accent was thick. So for the first few weeks, we really didn't bond or make a relationship. We didn't know each other's names. The only one that really knew them and that they knew was Jimmy. Because when we came out with him in the tailor tot and I headed off down the sidewalk and was passing by, he was standing at the front waving and calling out, "Hey, hey, hey," and they were all waving back and calling back in languages I certainly didn't understand sometimes, that they were calling out their heys as well, and they were laughing. And as they laughed, he laughed. And that little boy had a laugh that came from the middle of his being and just was deep and funny and contagious. So it was fun to be out with him, meeting all the ladies, and it went for blocks. I mean, anywhere we went, because it was 1957. There was no air conditioning in a big apartment building like that. It hadn't been installed yet. And so they came out to the street for some breeze. Maybe they were sitting under a tree, something so that it wouldn't be so hot for them outside. They opened up finally their bags, and I was so happy to see what was in those mysterious bags. It was knitting. They pulled out beautiful yarn, pieces of fabric that they had knitted. I'm a knitter. At that time, I was 20 years old, and I was a beginner knitter. Somebody had taught me when I was in nurses training, and I looked at it, and it was beautiful what they were making. The colors were beautiful. You couldn't always tell what it was going to be, a scarf or a sweater or what. And I saw this one woman. She usually sat near the end of one batch of women, and she was making a small knitted jacket for a child that was about the same size as my little boy. And so I would go over and stand beside her, and she would smile, and she would shake her head, yes, yes, and I tried to tell her what my name was, and she was sort of got it, but not really, and ask her, what is this? How do you do this? And every once in a while I'd catch a word. And then finally one day that we were there, she took the paper wrappings off of her wool and gave it to me. Melrose was the name of the company that made this wool. It was thick, very thick, and there was an address on it that was in Brooklyn. I didn't know whether this was a place that made the wool or was just a store to buy it. And she said, go, 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 show me, go. And I understood her when she pointed to the jacket and she pointed to Jimmy and how big he was across the shoulders, and that the jacket was just about the right size for him, a little big, but just right. And she said, get it. That evening, I spoke to Mrs. Geiger, our landlady at the house, and I said, Mrs. Geiger, I see all these women out sitting outside, and they're knitting. And she says, oh, yes, yes, they are. That's what they do. And I said, but I don't understand what they say. And she said, oh, my dear, you're not going to understand what they say. And I said, why not? They've just come from Europe. 2, 3, 4, 5 years. This is they came over in the 40s. They were rescued from the camps. They're some of the lucky ones. They were some of the lucky ones. They don't speak English yet. Maybe they will, but they're not working at learning the language because they won't have a job. They live with families or people who knew their families or people who were taking in refugees. And they know each other, so they go outside and they're talking about where they lived and who they were and what they knew and all sorts of different things. That's who they are. And that night when Jim came home from the hospital, I told him. And I said, I haven't told you there's this group of women and they sit out there and they talk and talk and talk, and I'm still not sure what language they're using. He said, well, I'll take a mean guess here. They're speaking Yiddish, Ellousie, because they're probably Jewish that have been saved from those camps. And he said, the reason that I happen to know that is because at the Kings County Hospital, our folks that come in from this area, it's a large Jewish area. And when they bring their older family members or friends here, those people don't speak English either. And the only thing that's helping me do my job is the fact that I took German for 3 years when I was in college. And at least we can communicate the most important things that I need to know from them. Every day I think about it, I'm really grateful to have studied that German when I was in college. I didn't think I would ever need it, but here I need it every day. I didn't learn German. I didn't. But I learned them. Those women were wonderful to me. They recognized that I was as much a stranger in this town as they were. And we all tried to be friendly. They taught me how to knit. I was successful in making that dark blue jacket for Jimmy. And in fact, I think that it's in my basement in a special box, and Jimmy wore it, and then Karen wore it, and then Robin wore it. And I was proud when I saw it. It wasn't perfect, but it was warm, and it fit him, and then it fit the girls as well. I've never forgotten them. And I also, remember Mrs. Geiger, who was also from Europe. And after I had studied art for a number of years and I had her pictures in my eyes, I recognized that she was European trained in her painting. And I hadn't known enough at the time to ask her questions so that I could find out more. As I look back, it makes that living in Brooklyn richer to me. And I don't know that Jimmy remembers it, but he still waves and smiles and makes friends with people. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. Come back. I'm going to have other stories